Hello everyone, I'm going to be going over whether or not you should actually buy the VK 168.01 Mauerbrecher that should be coming into the advent calendar. As far as what most people believe, tomorrow being the last tank here for the holiday ops, basically leading up to Christmas. But anyway, comparing the two, I'm going to compare it against the VK 100.01P here, and also the other tier 8 German premium heavy tank, the Löwe, that's currently in the game here. So I'm going to compare all three against one another. First, I'm going to start off comparing the VK 168 to the VK 100 here. The VK 100 is already a really good tier 8 premium tank, and the VK 168, I'm going to use this for reference purposes because this most likely the Mauerbrecher is going to be in the advent calendar. Whereas you can compare them currently in the comparison in game, but right now, I'm going to use this one since this most likely is going to be in the advent calendar. The only difference is this has a custom paint job. VK 168 doesn't, but the camouflages turn out being the same if you apply it to the VK 168. Now you'll notice, because looking at the two different models, turret and the guns located a little bit further up on the VK 168 compared to the VK 100, but largely they're going to be the same tank in a lot of ways. But also there's some very key differences that you need to know when you go into purchasing this. Okay, so starting off here, both guns are virtually identical here. These both have 100% cruise in them, no equipment. That way, they're on equal footing. So looking at the guns, same damage, same penetration, rate of fire, pretty much going down the board, they're virtually identical here. The only difference is given that the turret is situated a little bit towards the front, more so on the VK 168 than the VK 100, it'll be able to fight a little bit better over hills. Not much, it's still going to be difficult given the size of it, but very little difference, but it does have a little leg up there. But pretty much the guns, all of its stats are identical between the two. Moving down to survivability, again, much of the same, 1700 hit points. And then if you look at the armor values, they are roughly the same. However, I'm going to go into more detail when it comes to the armor after I compare the two and also add the Löwe into the mix. The VK 100 is clearly better. While it doesn't look too large here, 20 more millimeters on the whole front, 20 more on the rear, and then the turret outside of the rear armor is virtually the same listed wise. There are pretty big differences you need to know going into this. Mobility, the VK 168, both are really large tanks. 120 tons for the VK 100, 168 tons for the VK 168. It does have a stronger engine, has more specific power. Speed is, the same, capped at the same 20 forward, 15 kilometers backwards. Traverse speed is a little higher on the 168. So speed wise, this will have a very slight edge, even given different terrain resistant values over the VK 100, but they're virtually going to be identical outside of the VK 168 will be able to turn its hull faster, and accelerating a little bit and going up hills, the VK 168 is slightly better than the VK 100, but it's kind of splitting hairs because both tanks, given that they're capped at 20 kilometers an hour and both can reach it very easily, it's not that it's not as big of a difference as it appears here, given that it's capped at 20 kilometers an hour. If it was like 22, 25, it would be a very significant difference. Concealment, given that this has camouflage painted on it, this is basically the max you're going to get here. The VK 100 edges it out, but with these values, it's, it doesn't really matter. They're so low. And then finally, view range, signal range are same across them. Now, adding in the other German heavy premium, let's get that into the mix. I'm just going to configure it to get a good sense as far as, I guess take this off for good measure. basically, you know, between the two, most people know that the VK100 compared to the Löwe currently in the game, you know, they play slightly differently. You have less damage per shot, 440 versus 320 on the current premium. You have more penetration, however, more gun depression. You'll be able to fight over hills very well. More accuracy, aiming time, while better on these, it's kind of splitting hairs given the accuracy difference. And you have a little bit less DPM, but more or less the gun, I would say that the Löwe works better with its gun outside of close range brawling. Hit points a little bit lower, armor a little bit worse, but again, pretty good armor frontally as long as you're not like close up brawling, but your turret's very strong to where while the values are different, they are comparable. Mobility is better on the Löwe than the VK100 and 168, but more or less, you know, the tanks, while you're comparing them because, you know, currently there's only one tier 8 heavy premium for Germany, at least in, you know, in the game that's readily available. You know, the comparison between the two, the Löwe is a little bit more of a mid-range, you know, tank to fight at, and unless you're towards the top tier on your team, you know, brawling with it's a little harder given the 320 alpha. But more or less, I'd say for practical purposes, you know, while the VK168 plays close to the VK100, and VK100 is a very good tier 8 heavy tank, you know, currently the difference in performance, there's not that huge of a difference. They play differently, but both are very good premium tanks in the game. Now, getting into the armor differences here, I'm going to close this out. I don't have a preview of the VK168. I'm just going to, because I don't have a mod installed for it, but I'm going to base everything off of the VK100 here and go down the armor values. And let me bring this up. So in the upper right here, I have a lot of different armor values. So starting off at the upper glacis on the VK100, it's 340 millimeters effective armor, given the slope and also the thickness. The VK168 Mauerbrecher, you know, it's a hair bit weaker at 314 millimeters effective across most of it, which, you know, only tier 10 tanks and some tier 9 say throwing premium, that's going to make a difference there. But whereas the VK100, they'll most likely bounce given the effectiveness. There is a possibility that, you know, tier 10 TDs can just punch through your upper plate very easily, given the difference. The main thing that most people are probably going to overlook, given most people just look at the listed stats, the VK168, the premium tank, has a very large machine gun port located, you know, right in this area on it, to where that drops all the way down to 147 millimeters effective armor. So tier 6s are going to be able to penetrate you, and it is very large, and even the outside edges of it are still fairly weak, to where tier 6s, tier 7s, pretty much anything is going to be able to penetrate you. You don't have a solid frontal upper glacis like the VK100. Moving down the lower glacis, VK100 has 191 millimeters effective armor. VK168 has, across most of it, 184 millimeters effective. However, the little area here on the premium has 314 millimeters effective armor. So that's a little bit of a leg up, but, you know, basically people will most likely learn not to shoot just under the lip here. Moving on to the frontal, stupid Christmas house. Moving on to the frontal turret here. I'm gonna zoom in the best I can. So the VK100, you know, right into the center here, 234 millimeters effective, going to 292 towards where most people are gonna shoot until it gets super angled. The VK168, it's slightly weaker, but, you know, not by much. 230 right in the dead center on the premium VK168, and that goes to 302 towards the angled edges. The main difference you're going to see, which, you know, the VK100 you know, P here in the tech tree, it doesn't have many weak spots on its turret, for tier 9, 8, 7, and 6 tanks, because, there's no, even though it's 234 in the center, it's really hard to hit this flat area. There's no mantlet weak spot, and the cupola is strong. Now, moving to the mantlet's essentially immune to shots on the VK100 here. The VK168, you're going to see the mantlet, instead of being very petite here, we'll say, it's square. It's pretty large. Comparison, it's kind of more like the mouses in a way, to where it's, around the gun, a very large square shape. So on the VK168, the mantlet center is actually only 230 to 235 millimeters effective. So roughly the same as the small turret front areas found on the VK100. However, roughly for size, given that the turret's larger on that, it's going to be a fairly big weak spot that most tier 8s, but especially tier 9s and 10s, can just shoot right around your gun area, and there's no second layer of armor behind it, so they can pen you there. Moving on to the cupola, the VK100 1P's cupola, which probably frustrates many. The weakest area on it is 220 millimeters right in the center, 239 towards the top, and then the edges are 290 millimeters plus effective armor. The VK168, the premiums, which this isn't on the listed stats because it just takes the highest frontal turret armor into account, the cupola on that is only 150 to 170 millimeters effective in the center. So again, tier 6, tier 7, pretty much any tier tank you're going to be able to face can pen you in the center of the cupola. And then the edges, they start at 188 and go 224 millimeters effective unless you hit the very edges. So the cupola is much weaker on the VK168s. So the main difference frontally, as you kind of saw, is the premium version is going to have a upper glacis weak spot, still has the lower glacis weak spot. The weak spots on the turret front are very pronounced because the turret is larger, it has more frontal area with the mantlet weak spot. Plus the cupola is weak as well, to where the VK101P, overall the armor outside the lower plate is pretty damn good. Now moving on to the side, there are some important differences here too. The VK101P's turret side, 183 millimeter effective up to 196. The VK168s, however, a little bit different. It's 180 to 185 across the whole thing, so a little bit weaker all around. It's just one uniform thickness and also angle for the most part. The upper side hull, VK101P, 130 millimeters effective up to 138 millimeters effective. VK168, 130 millimeters across, so virtually the same there. The main difference you're going to find, so the VK101P, looking at the space armor here, which is essentially from this line down on the tank. Basically, the lower side of the VK100 starts at 200 millimeters effective with two 100 millimeter thick plates, the space armor and the side hull. 240 millimeters effective if you hit the tracks, basically right above the wheels here that you can see. You can shoot through here and it's a little weaker. The VK168 premium tank again, it's only 125 millimeters effective if you don't hit the track areas, and 165 millimeters max. So that's a pretty significant difference between the two. And adding into the thing, because the space armor is only 60 millimeters, or yes, 65 millimeters thick on the VK168. Since it's a little bit weaker, penning an angled tank through this area is, it's much easier on the VK168, given that the hull is thick, not thicker, excuse me here. The hull on the VK168 is only 60 millimeters, and the space armor is 65 millimeters thick, and the tracks are 40 millimeters thick. I'm trying to get this right here. So it's much easier to hit an angled premium version, essentially, because that's what it is. The VK168 is essentially a premium version of the VK101P we have. And then finally getting to the armor on the back, 144 millimeters on the VK 100, 104 millimeters effective on the VK 168, and then the rear hull, it's kind of splitting hairs to where this is largely spaced armor here, with thin armor behind it. So 120 to 125 millimeters on the VK 100. Little bit tougher in a way on the VK 168, but no spaced armor, so it's a little bit more straightforward how to penetrate it there. 122 to 131. But anyway, you know, should you buy this tank, the VK 168 Mauerbrecher that's coming out most likely tomorrow in the advent calendar, to me, you know, if you need a German tier 8 premium heavy to train crews in, and you don't currently have the Lion, I'll say, I hate pronouncing that, the tank's name, the Löwe, more or less, if you don't have one of those already, I think, you know, it's not a bad pickup, the VK 168, if you don't have a crew trainer already for German heavy tanks, because there are other options. Oops, if I can actually get to it here, because there's also the VK 4503, which is just a tier lower. You know, if you don't have a crew trainer already, it's a decent pickup. Otherwise, you know, it's basically just a gimped version of the VK 101P in the tech tree. It's got many more weak spots as far as armor goes. The gun's virtually identical, HP of course, mobility slightly better, but you know, not anything mind-blowing, to where you're basically just getting a reskin VK 101P. So if you already have a Löwe, Lion, or a VK 4503, I would say you're better off, you know, unless you really like brawling, having a lot of armor at tier 8, you're better off passing on this. You know, that's mainly because with the added weak spots that you have on the VK 168, the premium, not the tech tree VK 100, those weak spots are gonna basically take this very sturdy tank you have in the VK 101P, to where even if you're facing off against tier 9s and tier 10s, like I encounter them all the time, I'm always trying to aim really precisely, because if you don't have a shot in the lower plate, you have to hit it flat on a turret or very flat on the cupola, or else you're just going to bounce off. Even trying to shoot it, given that the hole is 100 here and then 100 millimeters space armor, shooting it here is even hard, where you have to aim well. The premium, you're going to have a weak spot in the lower plate, the upper glacis with that very large machine gun port. You're going to have a weak spot on the, basically the mantlet, dead set, and center in the turret. It's going to be much larger, the front of the turret, than the VK 100s here, and also the cupola. So, you know, even though your turret armor is, or not turret armor, your overall armor on the VK 168, it's still very good. You're going to find yourself taking a lot of damage in the thing, because down to tier 6 can penetrate you, whereas the VK 100 here, if I see it in a tier 6 or a 7, and even a tier 8 sometimes if I'm close to it, I'm getting myself to a different area, because you can't reliably pen these things, even with premium round. But anyway, hopefully this video helped you out a little bit. You know, while I do think the VK 168 it's going to be a good premium tank, regardless. It's just whether or not is it worth it to pick up. If you already have a premium, you know, the Löwe here, to grind your German heavy tanks for, and also credits, or if you have the VK 4503. You know, both of those, if you already have them, you know, there's not too much incentive to pick up the new one, but if you don't have them, it's not a bad tank to pick up regardless. But anyway, hopefully this video helped you out, whether you're on the fence or not, or if you just wanted to figure out how to kill these things, because most likely there's going to be a ton of them on the servers for at least the next week or so. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully I'll see you on another video. Have a nice one.